if I walk, okay, so how can you tell if a cult is a cult? But if I walked into a church,
Okay.
because this is something people do, is go into churches
Sure,
sometimes.
they do. Yeah,
Not as much as they used to, but they still do it.
that's true.
How would I know going into a church if this church exhibited cult-like behavior?
Okay.
Like, what should I be looking for in this church to know?
So you're making a distinction now between like the Christian cults that are like kind of pseudo-Christian because of their kind of maybe weird or off centered or away from Orthodox tradition and teachings in terms of doctrine and theology.
Right, but some cults,
and you're talking about like behavioral type stuff.
Well, like some, because we're an evangelical world and they're all different.
Sure.
Every church is its own little thing.
Right.
And so, or sort of we are.
Right.
But a lot of these cults look like that.
Yeah. Well,
so how would I know that if I went to a church, my localest closest place, that I didn't walk into a cult?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, even the one I talked about just a second ago with my friends, I had a couple of friends that had come out of one from a ministry, when I was in college. Mm-hmm. When you first walked in, you wouldn't have known. Like there's not like a sign or a banner up there that says "Welcome to your first day at the cult," right? Like it was just a Bible study,
right?
And I think what happens is things that you're talking about, looking for is like, so for example, this particular group, when it begins to talk about how they have the revelation, only they've got it right, right, and only their particular Christian quote unquote group is actually the saved ones, but everyone else is going to hell. Only they have the revelation that's truly the right revelation.
Okay.
I think those are the kind of your initial warning signs.
But are they going to come out and flat out say that?
Eventually, yes.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, like if they're a cult, yes.
All right.
Because they're eventually going to say that we've got it right, everyone else has it wrong.
Okay.
100%. And then I think there's also that sense of, where again they begin to kind of isolate you,
Okay.
and away from other people that could tell you differently.
Okay.
And so I think those are kind of like your two initial things that are going on. But if I mentioned this last week, and so
can I stop you for a second?
Yeah.
Okay, so if I go into a regular church,
okay,
they're gonna say, we have it right. Every other religion is wrong.
Okay,
you need to cut yourself off from all your non-Christian friends and family.
Oh God, I hope they're not saying that.
I've heard that a million times.
Well, that's terrible.
Well, yeah. Not cut yourself off, but they're gonna be a bad influence on you if you continue to hang around in that world. Yeah, then you're gonna still be the same sinner that you used to be.
Well, that's a big youth group message, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, that was a huge youth group message.
Yeah. So what is how would I differentiate between something that's an actual cult and
something that's cult-like,
that type of normal Christian stuff that I'm used to?
Yeah, no, that's a good. Okay, I think there's a huge difference between. Okay, to the first point, huge difference between saying, "Hey, only the Christian religion is right."
Right.
That's one statement. It's a whole nother statement to say this particular local gathering is the only one that has it right.
Okay.
In every other denomination, every other church is wrong. Mm-hmm. But our particular group.
Yeah. And also the third thing, which is exactly what you said, is if I go to a regular church, they're going to want me to get super involved in all the things and spend a lot of your time here and with us. And it's just not a lot of difference. You get what I'm saying?
No, I get. So so I think the first part is, as long as they're not making statements like only our particular little group has it.
Okay.
Right. Or only our particular denomination has it.
So what is the correct statement?
That, for me, the correct statement would be, because Christianity is a religion of exclusivity in the sense of, as Christians, we do believe that we are the ones that have it right, quote unquote, because we believe that Jesus Christ is the Messiah,
right?
That he came and died and we're following him, but that all Christians throughout the globe are saved, and that we all agree on these, essential doctrines, right? These fundamental things.
Okay.
And so that's like, it's one thing for the church, like at large, to say, hey, at large, we believe Jesus Christ is the only way, the only truth. He is the only way to the Father. No one comes to the Father except through him, right?
Okay.
That whole John 14 passage. We believe that's true. That's a big difference between that and then this particular little group.
Okay. So what do you say to not make people think that you're the only one that has it right at your church?
Oh, at our church?
Yeah.
Well, because I think when we have, I don't think I've ever, I've never been like, we've got it right or we do it best.
Okay.
I've never said those kind of things because I know we don't have everything right and I know we don't do everything the best. And
wow.
So, yeah. And I think another thing for me, and I had this conversation with someone recently.
Slap in the face to all the people that work for you.
Pointing fingers at Joseph. All right. So, but I think that, when, like, if you were, for example, I tell people this all the time, if you were to walk into my office or to my study at the church and you look through my bookshelf,
mm-hmm.
you're going to see authors from an insane amount of different groups, denominations, theological leanings.
Okay.
It would be really hard pressed, I think, for someone who didn't know me, didn't know what I believed. If they walked in and looked at all across my bookshelves, I think it'd be really hard pressed for them to like kind of nail me down going, oh, well, based upon this, you are a Calvinist, or you are an Arminian, or you are a charismatic, or you are a cessationist. Like, because I have all of those books and literature in my
I don't
study.
think a lot of people would know what any of those things are.
Well, that's probably true too. But my point just being is, like, I know that there's like I know that there are things like for example, the Wesleyan tradition that I come from.
Mm-hmm.
I don't hold hook, line, and sinker to everything that John Wesley taught.
Okay.
Even though he's the founder of Methodism, there's things I really disagree with John Wesley on.
Okay.
And therefore, in some ways, I might be more Baptist in my understanding of something.
Okay.
Or I might be more charismatic or Pentecostal in my understanding of something. And so I think
so what would you call thinking this way? Like, how... I don't know how I'm trying to ask this. Well, thinking that way is different from the way cults think.
Right.
So,
Because I'm willing to validate, I think that's probably a word. I'm willing to validate every other denomination as long as we're adhering to these essential, doctrines.
Okay. So what about people staying at your church though?
Okay.
Like if people wanted to leave, what is the, like,
what is that? What is that like?
What would you say?
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Sure. No, I think it's a great question because obviously just pastoring for 20 plus years, you have people leave the church.
Yeah.
Right. And
because you're not supposed to leave a cult.
Right.
Yeah.
And obviously there are people who leave cults who get out of them.
Right.
But then generally you're cut off from that community if you do.
Yeah.
And so
or murdered.
Or that. So I think obviously that's a huge difference for us, right? We're not putting a hit out on anybody if they leave. But no, my conversation is I always want to know.
Not a physical hit.
Right. I always want to know like, all right, why, why are you leaving? Like, I do want to know that.
Okay.
Like what happened? And, what's going on in your own heart? What's going on in your own life? Was there an offense? Or, like why?
So you're okay with people going to other churches and still think that they're right?
100%.
Okay.
Like I've even encouraged people to go to different churches.
Okay.
Other than ours.
Okay.
Because I felt like there was a church that might be a better fit for them than us.
Okay.
Like, just this last week this happened.
Do you think most pastors act like this?
I hope so.
Okay.
I mean, so like, for example, I'm one of the group of guys that meet on Thursday mornings together. It's just a handful of us, but a few of us, we routinely recommend the other churches to people.
Okay.
Because we think, like, so for example, I have this one friend, he's an Anglican priest. Well, their whole liturgy, their whole style is going to be very different than what we have at our church. And so there was a conversation I was having with someone the other day, and I was like, hey, I would recommend you going to this Anglican church in our community.
Okay.
Because I feel like that might be a better fit for them than us. Now, by all means, feel free to come and visit us, but I just want you to know there's other churches. I've had people that I've discipled and walked with, and maybe they were with me in other churches, but they don't want to come to the church I'm at now, but they're like, hey, we're looking for these few things. Do you have churches you would recommend? I mean, I'll give them a list of churches around our community and say, hey, I know they're really strong in this, or this, they're really strong in this, and go check them out. They're people I would recommend. They're pastors I would trust. I mean, man, we're about the kingdom, not just about our own little local church. So,
okay. So if I was a new Christian or whatever,
okay,
and I walked into a LDS church and I was like, hey, I'm looking around at churches and I just want to know what kind of, like what's going on with each of them and see which one I like the best.
Right.
Like, and I said, we're going to go check out the Catholics next. After this thing this week. What would they tell me?
They probably would. I mean, because genuinely, Mormons are some of the nicest people in the world.
Okay.
They would probably say, great, go do that.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, because you're not part of the church.
What if I was
yet.
a year in?
So you've been active, like you're actually have joined the church?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I said, hey, I'm not feeling this. I went to a Catholic church last week and I kind of like that more.
Right. I don't know because I don't know. I really don't know because I don't know pastors in the Mormon community.
Okay.
And so I don't know what they would say.
Okay.
I really don't. I would assume if you're just visiting, cool. But I'm trying to think how to phrase this. I feel like over time, Mormons have become more and more wanting to kind of feel like they're part of the larger Christian community.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I don't know if you get that much kickback from them if you're visiting, but I think once you're in and like this is what you're a part of, I would assume. I don't know. I would assume they would tell you, but they're not the true Christians. Only we are.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I think from
I think
from a larger, just broader perspective, they want to present themselves as if they're part of the larger Christian community.
But they're the best ones.
Yeah, but the reality is they don't think that actually. Like they believe we're wrong, right?
Right.
I mean,
okay.
They would like if you were asking them, what do you think about Pastor Joseph's theology? They'd be like, oh, it's garbage.
Okay.
And here's why. But
they'd say that nicely.
I'm sure they would. I'm sure they would, but also probably pretty,
Yeah.
Here's why he's completely off theologically. This is why he's just dead wrong.
Okay.
So
if you go there, you're going to be following someone who's dead wrong. So you might as well stay here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I would assume
nicely.
I would assume that's how. Now, again, if you're a Mormon following or listening to this, man, we'd love to throw your comments in there.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
So I think
and I will say this, it's not like, because like I do know Mormons, I just don't know. I don't, and I've had a conversation with them. I just don't know how the pastors or the leaders themselves would handle it. That's what I don't know.
Okay.
So,
but I guess the issue is if I'm going to a church, it could be a long time until I realize they're a cult.
But I really don't think it'd be a long time.
Okay.
Because again, I think you're going to hear we're right, everybody else is wrong. Whether that's from a local, small little gathering or from a church as large as like the Mormon church, right?
Okay.
And so I think at some point you're going to hear that, and then then you get into something you mentioned earlier, like the idea of like cutting other people off.
Mhm.
I wanted to hit that because I do think that's been a problem in the evangelical church.
Okay.
And I mentioned the youth group element of it
Mm-hmm.
because even though I didn't grow up like in a youth group, I would, when I was a youth leader and even as a pastor, you see, the teenagers, you hear that kind of language a pretty good bit.
They said this stuff all the time. I was like 8 or 7 or whatever.
Okay.
And this was a children's church thing.
Okay.
It was children's church.
Okay.
And they said, basically they said, we want everyone to pick someone in their life that they know they need to cut off. And it was like a friend. Pick a friend that you know you need to cut off. And
Are you serious?
Yeah. They had us all figure out someone in our life and why we needed to cut them off and why we thought that, like, we had to use our own judgment on what they were doing that was sinful. Wow. And why they led us down to something sinful. And then talk about it in a small group. We had to get together in like groups of 5 kids and
you were like 8 or 9?
Yeah. And name our friend and what sins they were doing and why we needed to not be friends with them anymore.
Really?
Yeah.
That blows my mind.
Yep.
I can't imagine asking an 8 or 9-year-old kid to do that.
Yeah.
They don't even have the bandwidth to do that. To really understand it,
no.
Right? I mean, they're in your grammar development stage, right?
And then I did it and then was still friends with the kid.
You're like, I'm going to cut you off.
Yeah.
But I'm not cutting you off.
It was like the next day. I'm like, well,
right.
I'm bored and I want to hang out with my friends. So,
because
once you become friends with somebody, you learn all their stuff.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
You're going to know that they're doing something wrong.
Right.
And so you could pick anybody.
Right.
So, yeah. So that's a whole thing in youth group. And then they did it in high school. Like, obviously, high school is the worst.
Right.
Where they're like, you need to not, not hang out with entire groups of people.
Yeah.
Because they're, doing something wrong. And they talk about it all the time. But that was something that happened to me. I might have been 7, 8, or 9. Somewhere around there.
That's wild to me. Now, so, like, where... And if you're asking, like, where does some of this come from?
Okay.
So that's what I kind of just wanted to just pull something up real quick. So, 1 Corinthians 15:33 says, "Do not be deceived. Bad company ruins good morals." Or it depends on the translation you're using. It may say, bad company corrupts good morals.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's where some of this is pulled from.
Okay.
And they're not, but so Scripture is clear in this, right? In that, that actually is part of it. Let's see. In verse 32 in 1 Corinthians 15, what do I gain if, humanly speaking, let me see. Hold on. I'm sorry. Verse 33, "Do not be deceived. Bad company ruins good morals." Verse 34, "Wake up from your drunken stupor, as is right. Do not go on sinning, for some have knowledge of God, as I say this to your shame." And so what's interesting is, in the midst of this context, the passage that Paul's addressing the Corinthians with here in 1 Corinthians 15, like, it is true. Bad company can corrupt good morals, right? Like, if that's all that if that's all the people I'm hanging out with,
mm-hmm.
And that they're encouraging sin and I'm remaining in sin, that's true. But to cut people off, sometimes we have to cut people off. Sometimes that's there, but not like as an 8-year-old. Like, sometimes I have to cut off my drug dealer, right?
Right.
Sometimes I have to cut off the friends that are constantly clamoring for me to jump back into an addiction that I'm trying to escape from.
Right.
Right? Like, but we make those decisions as like adults. My issue with like the kids, with even like youth group age, it's like, and I get it in youth group. Hey, and kind of the thing was like, go stay. I even had this said to me after I got saved. I was in high school, senior in high school.
Mm-hmm.
and I was at a gathering at someone's house doing like for Bible study kind of thing. And one of the guys who had been part of this group was kind of struggling and wasn't really sure about his faith anymore and was out and so I had told this individual, hey, I'll come, connect with you later on tonight. So like the Bible study went long. It's like 10 o'clock and I'm like, I'm out. And I remember the group leader telling me like, Joseph, why are you going to hang out with this person? Like the people you need to hang out with are right here.
Right.
And I'm like, no, that guy still matters. Right? Like, yeah, he left the group and yeah, he's struggling with his faith, but just because I go hang out with him at Waffle House doesn't mean I'm going to be, jump back into some kind of party scene, like, no, he's still a friend.
It is Waffle House though.
It is Waffle House. What are you going to do? And so, but I do think that, so what I'm saying is I think that I understand the motive of people trying to say, hey, watch the people you hang out with, right? But I think when you're just told to like cut off everybody that's a non-believer, like what are we doing? Like shouldn't we be a light to everyone that doesn't know Jesus?
I'm I feel like it's pretty common, though.
Man. Yeah, it probably is more common than I would like in the evangelical world.
Yeah,
yeah, and I don't doubt it.
So, and that's why I asked the question: like, how do I know which one's a cult and which one's not a cult?
Yeah, and I don't know if that's like a cult, right? I don't think that's a cult per se, because they're not telling you to cut. Hopefully, they're not telling you to cut off your family and that kind of stuff. But if they're making blanket statements like cut off everyone who's a non-believer and your families are non-believers, and that includes them, right? Well, that's okay. That's problematic, right? Like, even if they're not full-blown cult, that's really cult-like, and I'm out of there.
Right.
I'm out of there. So even if I'm not even if I point to it and go, well, that's not a cult, but that's no. I mean, right?
To me, you're almost telling me don't go to church. That's the problem I'm having.
Oh, I see.
With some of this conversation.
Right.
Like you basically just told me never to go to church.
Why? How?
Because that's been my whole experience in church.
Okay. But that's not been, and I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
But that's obviously not the experience that you would have in every church.
Well, right. But
yeah.
I feel like a lot of people watching this, you just told them never to go to church. I'm just telling you.
Because that they've heard that kind of phrase.
Yeah.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is too, like, no, I don't like it.
Oh, you got saved? All right. All this shit starts today. No more non-Christian friends. No more alcohol. No more.
Right.
Don't smoke weed ever again. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, welcome to sign all this. You're never going to do this again. Never going to do that. You left all that behind and you don't want any of that anymore. And you're done.
Right.
And you're only going to hang out with us. And because if you hang out with anybody else, they're going to drag you to hell with them.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. No, like in actually, remember the BITE acronym I used last week about cults? Like that B, the very first letter there is behavioral control.
Right.
And so this is dealing with, really kind of like trying to govern people's actions based on like a real like strict set of rules.
Okay.
And so, and there's like basically rewards and punishments if you obey these things or not. And I think sometimes in Christian circles, we can use those things of like, man, you do those things, God's going to cut you off and he's done with you.
Yeah.
But hey, if you do all these things that are right, man, God's going to really like you,
Okay. So I guess the real question is, where does cult-like behavior end and full-blown cult begins?
Yeah. Because I think I think there's, man.
Because I don't like any of it.
Yeah. No, I don't either.
Unless I'm the leader of the cult, which we've established. But
100%
But if I have to go to a church,
right,
I don't want to be a part of none of that.
No, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I don't. No, and I do. I don't think most churches are like this. Okay. Now I know some of the some of the kind of groups you came up through. right?
Yeah.
And they were the kind of the legalistic Pentecostal churches.
I came up through legalistic, very spiritual, whatever that is called.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know how you combine those two, but
yeah, I know.
But
It's very legalistic and it's very charismatic / Pentecostal.
yeah, it's like we have to be all spirit while we're at church.
Right.
And then when we leave, we can do nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you really need to be all spirit then too.
Right.
I know. And so I do think that I think that kind of, I don't know how to phrase this. I think that particular kind of like vein of Christianity, right? And you have a lot of that where there's, this is kind of what we're getting to probably. Like there has been a legalism problem in church.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the topics that we go through, I ask you if this is culty.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think anytime you get into that kind of strict legalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that kind of like, listen, we're not saying you don't call sin. I'm like, you call sin. My problem lies when we start adding on a bunch of rules on top of what's already there within Scripture. Okay. So for example,
which is what cults do.
Which is absolutely what cults do.
Yeah.
Right. They either add on or they misinterpret or they kind of fixate on just a few portions of Scripture and they're like, this is it.
Yeah.
You know? And I think especially if you're trying to take, you know, certain like Old Testament passages and apply them today and go, these are still all of the rules that you need to live under. Right. Well, no, right? And we've talked about this before. I'm not going to go into all of it. But like the reality is, yes, I need to do the things that's still going to love God and love others. Mm-hmm. And I need to know what sin is so that I can call sin. But at the same time, I'm not like all of these rules of like how to dress and this is exactly what kind of, you know, like the, you know, go sacrifice this thing or wash this many times or because you did this. Actually, like, no, that's not part of our Christian ethic now, you know, or worship now. And so when individuals like adding on all of these like really strict rules, like when they're trying to govern, like, all right, this is the kind of bathing suit you can wear, right?
Right.
This is where you can go or not go. You know, you better never drink alcohol. Like, what are we talking about?
Yeah.
You know, like, and again, I'm for modesty. I'm not saying, you know, just go wear whatever the heck you want to. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm not like. There has to be modesty, but it's got to be in loving context and not in this condemning manner of like, hey man, if you you girls, if you wear that, you're just basically just, you know, sluts that are, you know, going to lead guys into lust and it's all your fault and da. Man, what are we? I'm sorry. What are we talking about? And so I hear what you're saying as far as like, it makes people going to go, well, I don't want to go to church again because there are these elements that are there, but I think they're in particular streams of churches. I think there's a whole lot of churches that don't have that in there.
Right.
That don't have the behavioral control, that don't have, you know, the thought control and and trying to isolate you. And I think there's a lot of churches that are not like that. One of the things that I think maybe we're getting around to is like, I have to recognize, like, so as a pastor, I have to recognize the individual autonomy of the people that are there with me.
Okay.
I can't mandate them to do something.
Right.
That's not my prerogative.
Okay.
And maybe that's where the cult-like stuff comes in. Right?
Where you
I can
pastor, leader person.
Correct. I can give counsel, right?
Right.
I can say, hey, the Proverbs would say this, and this would be wisdom for us. Okay?
Okay.
Or I can say Scripture says this, and this would be wisdom for us. But I can't like mandate people to do certain things.
All right.
And I think whether it's adults, youth, kids, I think maybe that's kind of the essence of what you're talking about. Like when behavior starts being forced and I mandate that you do this, right? That's to me where it becomes problematic. Like I can call people to live righteous and holy lives, but ultimately at the end of the day, that's up to them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I can't carry that for them.
I think my whole thing with this question though is, if I were to walk into any given church, how would I know this?
Yeah.
What am I looking for?
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, like if I only had one service to spend at this church,
I don't know how much you're going to gain from. I mean, like obviously there's like the crazy red flags that are going to come up in one service.
Okay, like if they started bleeding snakes out,
right,
or somebody who's naked up there,
right? Yeah, I mean it's just something crazy.
Yeah, okay.
But I think
that makes sense,
right?
But
or like, yeah, I think it would probably take time,
right,
to discern that.
Okay.
I would be interested in like, what is their membership process? Okay, what are you saying yes to? What are you agreeing to?
Do I have to sign contracts?
Yeah, do you have to sign contracts?
Okay.
Do you have to? I mean, there's one church in
don't join a church where they make you sign a contract to be a member.
No.
Okay.
And don't. Okay, I'll say this too. There's a church in our area. They actually mandate that you hand them W-2s for the last several years.
Well, that wouldn't work because I have 1099s.
Or your 1099s. They want to know how much income they should be receiving from you.
Okay.
That's crazy. Like, who's handing over W-2s and 1099s to church?
The people I'm looking for online.
Right. You want them to hand you theirs. And so, but like, that's crazy. And this church is huge. Yeah. This is a massive mega church.
Yeah.
And people are just handing over their stuff.
I think I know which one you're talking about.
I'm like, how?
The guy's last name is Money?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know it. And it just, like, that's crazy, dude.
I feel like that's a famous church, though. Isn't that a famous church?
Oh, really?
Lots of people know about that?
Really well known.
Like,
church.
even out-of-state people know about that.
100%.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they're large.
Yeah.
Massive campus. I drove by the.
So that's a cult.
There's a lot of cult-like stuff in there, man.
Okay.
And a lot of horrible theology too, because they're big prosperity gospel.
Oh yeah,
preachers.
Well, they have to be. If they want your W-2s, of course they are.
Yeah, right. And if you give them the money, then you will get rewarded with more money, right? Or health or whatever. Right. So, no, but I think over time you can discern, like, what are they asking of me as a member? Are they asking me to start cutting all family members? That's like, I'm out,
Yeah.
Mandating, hey, you have to give X percent, you've got to give, let's say 10%, right? That's the tithe. You have to give 10% to come to this church.
So you would say don't go to any church that's doing any of these things that you're saying right now.
I'm out.
Okay.
I'm out.
All
because, again, now if someone, and I can already hear it, because it's kind of coming from both sides. Like, there's the one side, it's like, all right, yeah, you cannot mandate someone to tell them exactly how to live, right?
Right.
But at the same time, I do have to give counsel. And then if I know there's someone that's in our church that's constantly or continually living in sin,
yeah,
I do have to confront them at some point in time about their sin.
Okay.
Right. But so there's a balance in that. But I'm like, I'm not going to mandate, like, all right, hey, women, you need to have your hair a certain length, right? Mm-hmm. Your skirts or dresses have to be, how many ever inches from your ankle or whatever, right? Like, we're not doing that. And so,
okay.
I do think that's like the behavioral stuff. Again, I think most churches, you're going to walk in, you're going to be there, you're not going to feel the cult-like tendencies. Okay. I think in a lot of churches you're going to feel that way. I think the ones that people think of the most because they've had these experiences are really legalistic evangelical or really legalistic charismatic Pentecostal churches.
Are any of the rituals that we do at church.
Uh-huh.
Cult-like stuff.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm trying to think. Like ritual, like there's the traditional stuff of like, you mean like reciting the creeds or no.
Okay.
None of that's cult-like.
Okay.
You know, like no, that's not cult-like. The liturgy that's typically built in within a traditional church, that's not cult-like.
Okay. Can that stuff go too far though?
I think anything can go too far.
Like if we were drinking actual blood for communion, you know what I mean?
Right. No, that would run.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, like for real, run.
Okay.
And I do think that there is manipulation that can happen in churches. And I think I mentioned this too. Like for me, probably 3 things I look for. Okay. Is there manipulation? Is there intimidation? Is there domination?
All right.
And what I mean by that is like most of that is like behavioral / spiritual, you know?
Okay.
And where individuals are they lead through intimidation, and that can just be not just necessarily cult-like, but it can just be abusive, you know, in a church setting.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean like physical abuse, obviously, although it can be that, but I mean the intimidating that's like spiritually intimidating, like if you do not do this, God will curse you.
Right.
You know, that kind of stuff. And or like the yelling, screaming, I mean that happens too in leadership to try to get you to quote unquote submit to them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the idea of dominating through position, title, status, like those things shouldn't be there in church. And when people act that way, it's not okay. You know, like when I'm pastor, but when I cross a line of like, again, speaking in a way that is putting down another church member or staff member, like, no, that's on me. Like that's not okay.
Yeah.
And I have to say, and then I have to go to that person and say, forgive me. You know, I should not have spoken that way. Forgive me for being too harsh. Forgive me for being too like almost too direct. Right? Like I have to own that. And when there's no apologies happening for those kind of things, something's wrong. And so I think that when you're going to church, just you have to give it time. But again, I really think most churches are not like this. I really genuinely do.
Okay.
And it's really those really legalistic churches that you're going to find some of this kind of stuff.
And if they're super legalistic, you'd be able to kind of notice.
I think you're going to notice that pretty quick.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if they're a full-blown cult, you probably are going to know that pretty quick.
Yeah. And like one other thing I'll say, like in the charismatic Pentecostal circles, like one of the things that's like, man, they're like, if you've got prophets telling you've got to marry a certain person, like, nah, mm-hmm. like, no, just stop. Right. Like, or if you've got people from the stage going, everyone needs to give, $150, that just no, just stop. Or everybody, if you really love Jesus, this is the way you're going to worship. Right.
Right.
Oh, no. And that may just be spiritual immaturity more than, in other words, I don't think some people may not try to be cult-like. They're not trying to be a cult.
Right.
It's just spiritual immaturity. It's
that's a question for later.
Immaturity. Yeah. But that stuff's there. And that's not but you still need to be able to discern and go, but that's not okay.
Okay.
Because you're really trying to actually.
But you could also discern that they're spiritually immature and not trying to manipulate you. And
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. But you could also go, they may not be trying to, that may not be their intent, but that is what is happening.
Yeah.